Greetings and welcome to the Central Indiana AES Section's second presentation meeting for 2022. I'm Jay Dill, your newly installed chairperson for the section and your host for this evening's event. For those of you who joined us last month for the Telos Alliance event, welcome back. For those of you who were not able to join us, there's a recording of the event on the section website, centralindianaaes.org. So before we get rolling here, there's a couple of housekeeping items that we need to cover. And the first off is AES membership. If you're not a member currently, well, needless to say, I encourage you to join up and get involved. There are lots of truly useful benefits for the associate, student, faculty, and industry professional memberships that you can find out about, that is, at the mothership website, aes.org. For an example, some of the favorites are the AES Special Buys section and the video library, but hey, go see for yourself, aes.org. Now, again, on the local level, you can find out what's going on with our section at centralindianaaes.org. There you'll find information on membership and upcoming events. Speaking of which, details on our next section meeting will be released shortly. This time, our next meeting will be an in-person event. First one in a long time. It'll be at the headquarters of the CEDIA here in Indianapolis. The date will be May the 4th and will be starting at 7 p.m. Details will be forthcoming. And now for tonight's event, please put any questions that you may have during the presentation in the Q&A window, and we'll do our best to address them. And that would be the Q&A window, okay? All right, enough of that. It's a privilege and an honor to introduce tonight's guest, Gino Sigismondi. Gino is a 26-year veteran of the music and audio industry and the author of several Shure educational publications, including Selection and Operation of Personal Monitors. So I guess you could say Gino wrote the book on inner monitoring, maybe. Anyway, Gino, thank you so very much for sharing your evening with us. The virtual floor is yours, dude.
All right. Well, thank you, Jay. And thanks to everyone in the Central Indiana chapter for having me here. Once again, I did an event, what was that, a year ago or so with Michael Pedersen. I think we did the history, and it was a good time. And I'm glad to be back here again, particularly on this topic. I don't know that I would say I wrote a book on the subject. I don't know if it's the book, but I did write a book, and it was actually one of the first publication I ever wrote for Shure. We have a whole library of educational booklets and different, audio related topics. And that was my first. So this is a topic that's very close to my heart also because as we were just talking before we started here, Jay had picked up on the fact that I just recently celebrated 25 years with Shure Incorporated. So been here a while, but the very first new product training that I ever attended was on the PSM 600 system, Shure's first personal stereo monitor system that came out back in '97. So I remember sitting in a room feeling totally out of my element, but curious about this new technology that might apply to a disco cover band that I was working for at the time. And I thought, they need this. And so, my main gig is, I've always been an applications engineer at Shure, but along the side, I've always done sound for bands and very quickly realized the benefits of using personal monitor systems. So I will kind of share with you here. Let me share my screen actually, so you can see this, hopefully. Strategies for personal monitoring is tonight's topic, and share a little history of personal monitoring, and then kind of get into some sort of best practices, I guess, if you want to think of it that way, things to help musicians successfully transition to using this. So let's get started. All right. I feel it's worth, kind of starting with, a definition of what is a personal monitor system. And a more accurate definition of it might be actually a closed monitor system. And what we mean by that is that if you think about your traditional floor wedge monitor systems, I mean, any of you who mix live sound can rattle off what that means in terms of like the amount of sound that the monitor system contributes into the venue or to the acoustic environment, right? The personal monitor system, we refer to it as a closed monitor system because it doesn't actually affect the performance environment at all, like a wedge speaker with inside fills and all that other stuff. Where, you've probably been in those situations where you can turn off the main PA and still hear everything perfectly clear because of the backwash coming off the monitors, right? So the personal monitor system, when you've taken the loudspeakers and shoved them, isolated them into the performer's ears, you're not contributing to the acoustic environment. And also the acoustic environment, the venue doesn't really, it does a little bit, but to a large extent doesn't affect what the performers are hearing. So the performers get that sort of consistent experience of what they're monitoring every night, because again, it's an isolated experience. So that is kind of a very generalized statement of what a personal monitor system is. So when you're using these systems, you get plenty of volume, good, right? Because you're using an isolating earphone, so you can hear yourself and not being, hopefully deafened by a Marshall stack or getting those cymbals right in your ear going deaf on one side, right? So you can hear yourself because you're isolated. The issues of feedback go away because you've removed the potential acoustic gain from the situation, right? Which is, the number one way to get better gain before feedback is keep the microphone as far away from the loudspeaker. And if your loudspeaker is right at your feet with 4 feet from the microphone, it's kind of a recipe for feedback. So if you get rid of the stage monitors, feedback goes away. Very portable. If you are working in an environment where you have to haul around your own PA system, not having a bunch of wedge loudspeakers to haul around is a huge advantage. And it also, again, because it's not contributing to the performance environment, gives the performer it's a more practical way to let the performer have some control over what they're hearing. And we'll talk about how that actually happens later on. And there's, wireless and hardwired varieties of that. Of course, the wireless is a big deal because you want to be able to move around on stage. So just real briefly here, there's a quick look at how these things even developed, how we got here. And, like any other technological innovation, there's never like that one aha moment, this person invented this technology on this day and this year, and that's where it started. There's probably lots of little experiments and things going on with people, shoving Sony earbuds in their ears or at various times to try and, think like, well, geez, if I had the sound right here in my ear instead of on the floor, that would be better, right? The generally accepted kind of pioneer in all of this was a gentleman by the name of Marty Garcia. Around about 1982, he created a custom fit earphone for Todd Rundgren. And eventually, when that proved to be successful, Marty Garcia founded Future Sonics, which was probably the first company to really do a custom isolating in-ear earphone, which is, again, what is needed, right? And we'll talk at the end here about how to use personal monitors safely so you don't damage your hearing yourself. And a key component of that, again, is the fact that it does have to isolate. It has to act like an earplug. And then in the somewhere around about the late 1980s, Chris Lindop, who was running monitors for Stevie Wonder, realized that performers want to be mobile, right? They don't want to be dragging a headphone cable around behind them on stage. That could create yet another tripping hazard. So he got the idea to take a actually 5-watt FM radio transmitter. So you could probably pick up the monitor mix that Stevie Wonder here was using for blocks and blocks away. But he had a 5-watt transmitter and a portable FM receiver and some isolating earphones and, hey, wireless in-ear monitors. And that proved to be so successful that they eventually turned that into a product. It wasn't 5 watts. They had to drag that significantly down to get FCC approval. But the very first wireless in-ear monitor system was the Garwood radio station, which you see is a little red box pictured down in the corner there. In 95, Jerry Harvey was working monitors for Van Halen, and he created the first multi or dual driver custom earphone for Alex Van Halen, because prior to that, it was always a single, usually dynamic driver, but with the multi-driver earphones, one of the main benefits is better low end. So you can imagine being Alec Van Halen, he probably wanted lots of low end in his ears. And then Jerry Harvey eventually went on to found Ultimate Ears, whose earphones are very well regarded. And eventually I think he ended up turning into JH Audio or Jerry Harvey Audio, different company after Ultimate Ears. So that was pretty significant. And then in 97, as I just previously mentioned, that's when Shure got into the game with the PSM 600 system, which you can see on the lower right hand corner there. It was an opportunity for Shure to look at what we had already been doing with our expertise in wireless, starting to make some significant inroads in wireless microphones and our knowledge of good audio, and put it all together in a wireless in-ear monitor system. If you think about it, a wireless in-ear monitor system is really just a wireless microphone system backwards. Instead of a rack mount receiver and a portable transmitter, you have a rack mount transmitter and a portable receiver, the belt pack that you can just wear on your hip and plug any earphones into it. And because we were able to bring it out also at a price point that made it more affordable to musicians, the Garwood was pretty darn expensive. So it was only kind of being used by Stevie Wonder level people. So when PSM 600 came out, it put the in-ear monitor system within reach of a much wider audience and ended up becoming very popular. It had a whopping 2 frequencies. So, if you got interference on one channel, try the other one. Hope that one worked. And then there was 5 different units. So you had a total of 10 different possible frequencies to maybe get it work, but it worked. I mean, at the time it was a big success. And the other sort of key thing that became part of its success was the development of the E1 universal fit isolating earphone. Every earphone that was used for professional onstage monitoring prior to that, the Future Sonics, the Ultimate Ears, and all of that, was a custom earphone, right? So you had to go to an audiologist, get an impression made, just as if you're getting a custom earplug, and the audiologist would, make that kind of all one built-in custom thing, which can be expensive. It's extra steps. So the E1 was, I guess, I don't know if groundbreaking might be overstating it a little bit, but it basically was like a yellow foam earplug with a hole in it that the E1 balanced armature earphone went into, so that you got the benefits of the isolation at something that again was within reach of many more people to start getting into this game here. And 2011, Shure introduces PSM 1000, the first diversity receiver. I guess not technically the first, but technically the first diversity receiver with 2 discrete dedicated antennas that made it perform really well. This is significant because all previous in-ear monitor receivers, look at PSM 600 and the Garwood for an example, there was a single antenna system. And for those of you who have any experience with wireless microphone systems, you'll notice they most have 2 antennas for diversity. And that's because single antenna systems can be more prone to drop out. Diversity wireless mic systems very rarely ever drop out. So at the very high tier, when Shure came out with that pack for the PSM 1000 system, it very quickly became the de facto touring standard for wireless in-ears. And the other sort of significant development, I said 2010s. I mean, it kind of was a slower evolution, but the takeover of digital mixing and it getting more affordable for people was very significant in terms of the ultimate way to give performers themselves control over their monitor mix, which again is a really important benefit because not all bands can afford to have their own dedicated monitor mixer, which used to be kind of a requirement to really have a good experience with it. And we'll talk more about that later. So here's the word of the decade here, ecosystem, right? We're talking about the personal monitor ecosystem, what that looks like. So there's more to it than just the wireless thing in the earphones, right? And that's something that I think is often lost. We used to sometimes in internal discussions refer to it as the infrastructure, right? Just buying an earphone or buying a wireless system and an earphone is not all you need to have personal monitors, right? You still need a mixer of some sort, maybe multiple mixers, maybe a digital mixer, maybe iPads, all these other things that kind of go into it so that you can actually experience the personal monitor system. The first choice you have to make, of course, is going wireless versus hardwired. I think wireless is, again, sort of the the default that most people go to is like, of course you would be wireless, but more wireless means more frequency coordination and more other issues you have to deal with and more expense that you don't have to worry about when you're hardwired. So if it's your drummer seated behind the drum kit or keyboard player that don't really move around, then hardwired is really a perfectly viable option, and it's less expensive and just makes it makes it easier all the way around. The only potential con is it's more difficult to share a mix, which is easier to do with a wireless system. And that is because and this is it's funny, since we've come out with wireless in-ear monitor systems, this has been a perennial question that we get in tech support at Shure. I literally just answered this question for someone yesterday, which is, if I have one transmitter transmitting a mix, how many additional receivers can I have? And the answer is as many as you would like. So if everyone's okay sharing a mix, you just need one transmitter and as many receivers as you want to put on there, and it works totally fine. The analogy we often use is, you think of your car stereo, right? That's the receiver. The transmitter is the radio broadcaster, and every car driving on the road can all listen to the same radio station. Whereas if you try to share mixes hardwired, now you're talking about Y cables or distros, and then it gets a lot messier. But so the components of the wireless system itself, of course, are the earphones. Everybody needs to have an earphone if you want to listen. Every performer needs a receiver. And then the transmitters, like I said, that is dependent on how many mixes you want to do, right? So you need, if you're doing stereo, one for every mix. Same thing for mono. Dual mono, or what Shure refers to as mix mode, right, is where you can actually send out two mono mixes with a single transmitter. So that, again, is a way to save money. You need to do two mixes. You're okay with mono, great. One transmitter, performer gets a pack and they choose which mix they want to listen to. Earphones, as I mentioned, there's, I think the number one thing with an earphone, much like a microphone, is when people say, well, which one should I buy? Well, which one do you like the sound of the best is really ultimately the major deciding factor. But a couple of things you really have to keep in mind is that isolation is the key thing here, right? It has to provide good, a good, 20, 25 dB of isolation, at least on stage, so that you can listen at a safe level. Because if, you don't have a good isolating earphone, then you're going to be turning your pack up to probably dangerous levels, right? So isolation is really important there. Then you need to decide, do you want universal or custom fit? The universal, like we started with the E1 and can continue through to the SE846, is like an earplug that goes in your ear with a speaker in it that fits anybody's ear, right? That's what we mean by universal. And it doesn't require a visit to an audiologist and all that other extra stuff you have to do if you would like to have custom fit earphones. And again, there's some pros and cons to each. Some people think you get better isolation from the universal. Some people will tell you get better isolation from the custom fit. I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer there. Again, it kind of depends on the user. Again, multiple drivers, a few years ago, the driver wars got started where we started making their dual driver and then 3 drivers and 4 drivers and 6 drivers and 8 drivers. I don't even know what it got up to. It got to some ridiculously crazy number. The SE846 you see on the side there, that's our 4 driver earphone that we have, which is the most drivers that we've got. But it does yield, I think, the more drivers you have, just like a loudspeaker, right? If you in a loudspeaker, if you have a tweeter and a woofer, tends to sound better than just one loudspeaker, one 12-inch speaker trying to reproduce the whole frequency range. So dual driver is a good upgrade for a lot of people who want a little bit more bass. And then you can kind of go on from there as to whether or not it makes sense for you. And then the type of driver that's used, there's usually either dynamic drivers, which is kind of what's used in like an earbud. It's the most inexpensive and most rugged kind, maybe limited sound quality. The balanced armature, which is kind of borrowed from the hearing aid industry, gives you better sound quality. It's what's typically used in most multi-driver earphones are all balanced armatures because they're much smaller as well. Smaller and lighter, you can pack more of them in there. So actually, Shure just last year, time's kind of a blur now, came out with the Aonic 4, which is actually a hybrid. So it's got a dynamic driver in there to do the lows and a balanced armature to do the highs. So that's kind of an interesting thing there. But all that's to say, there's lots of choices. Often it's worth trying some if you can, just to figure out which one is the best, but just make sure you're getting good isolation. So looking at configuring a system here, this is, I like to tell people there's no cookie cutter solutions here for, which box do I buy for my band, right? There are some conversations I think that need to happen when a band is going to transition to in-ears that need to be answered to help make sure that you get to the right solution here. And the first question, I kind of already talked about this, right, is how many mixes are required? If one is enough, then one transmitter is all you need, right? But if everybody wants a separate mix, and if everybody wants it to be a stereo mix, you'll notice question number 2, mono or stereo, that impacts the number of components. Stereo really, stereo is nice. That's how we hear. We're used to hearing things in stereo, left, right, separation and all that sort of thing. But that means that you need a dedicated transmitter for each and every stereo mix. And then the mixer that you're using for monitors needs to have enough sends to support sending however many stereo mixes your band are doing. So it can get as nice as stereo is. And that's, of course, when you're at the pro touring end of things, that's what you're doing. You just have to kind of keep that in mind. You need a mixer that can support the number of mixes you want to do. And you need to find out with the band. Inevitably, when a band is first starting with in-ears and they've had no experience with it, they'll say, oh, one mix is fine. We can all share a mix. You can probably imagine how well that usually works, or at least how long it lasts, right? As soon as the singer asks for more or complains that the drummer is too loud, well, now you're on to at least a second mix. Speaking of that, we can actually kind of take a little more in-depth look. Kind of talked about all of these items, I guess, already here. I got ahead of myself, stereo versus mono. Kind of looking at a few examples here. Just real quick, this seems intuitive, but maybe the graphics help some people. Mono mode means that you're just sending one send from the transmitter. In fact, I probably wouldn't even do like this graphic shows here where they're like left and right sending the same signal to the transmitter. You just use the left and put it in mono mode. And then your pan knob or your pan buttons just, move that mono mix to the left ear or the right ear, somewhere in between. That's kind of how it would look if you were hooking it up. Stereo mode, of course, then is a left-right signal from the mixer to the transmitter, and you would need this for every stereo mix you want to put on stage. So now you have a nice wide, left-right stereo spectrum. The pan knobs pan the stereo mix around. Pretty straightforward. I think we all kind of understand how that works here. So here's a dual transmitter, two stereo mixes going to the two sets of transmitter inputs to two different receivers that are on two different frequencies, right? And then the mix mode, this is the one where it gets a little trickier to kind of wrap your brain around what it is. We also refer to this as dual mono. So now this is how we're using a single transmitter to put two mono mixes on the air. So these are still analog systems at this point. They use FM stereo multiplexing to send out the separate signals, which again in a stereo setup are left and right. But here we're putting mix 1 into the left input and mix 2 into the right input. Okay. And so every performer has a receiver that is tuned to the same frequency as that transmitter. And when you put it into mix mode, that's all it's really doing is summing the left and right inputs, which are now mix 1 and mix 2, to both earphones. And then when you pan using the pan knob or buttons, depending on which system you have, if you pan it all the way to the left, you still have sound in both earphones, but you're only hearing mix 1. And if you pan all the way to the right, again, same sound in both earphones, but or sound in both earphones, but you're only hearing the right mix or mix 2 on both sides. And this is the first, I guess, most basic way of something I mentioned earlier, which is giving the performer some ability to control their own mix on stage. Because it's not all or nothing. You can pan, it's a pan knob, right? You can be anywhere in between. So if the mix 1 is vocals and mix 2 is all the instruments, now the performer themselves on their pack can decide, do they want to hear all vocals, all instruments, or some blend in between? I need more vocals. Great. You do that yourself. You don't have to flag down the monitor engineer to make that change for you. So it's kind of basic, but for someone who's just getting started or just new to this or on a budget, it gives you flexibility that you never had before with the traditional floor wedge way of doing things. So again, how would you hook this up? Like this. So now we've got 4 mixes. That's why we've got 4 different colors: blue, yellowish gold, purple, and green, representing mixes 1, 2, 3, and 4, going into the 2. Again, this is a PSM 1000 we're looking at the back of here, so it's a dual transmitter, right? But that with that one rack mount device that has 2 transmitters, we've now got 4 mono mixes on the air. And the only note is that, of course, the performers, can only choose between the 2 mixes that they are coming in on their frequency. You don't have access to all 4 mixes that are on the air here. So just kind of don't let that little bit there confuse you. So now as you've seen, a monitor mixer of some sort is required in order to give the experience that the performers are looking for, right? And the key feature to look for is that the monitor mixer or the front of house mixer, if you're mixing monitors off front of house, has to have enough auxiliary sends or monitor sends to create the number of mixes that the performers want to hear. A lot of us here we're audio engineers. This is Audio Engineering Society. We get this, but a band that's investing in their first monitor system often does not. And so that's another conversation that needs to be had. And this gets further complicated when the band does not carry their own mixer or their own sound system, and you're reliant on, if you're a club band of some sort, or a theater or whatever, you're relying on the mixer that the venue has. You need to make sure that you kind of check that out ahead of time and make sure that they have the capabilities to provide enough mixes for you. So definitely need to have that conversation. Quickly here, we can kind of spin through a few examples again of how you might create different mixes in different scenarios. So scenario number 1 here is, let's say we've got the front of house mixer only has 2 aux sends available. Probably going to want to take advantage of mix mode in this scenario, unless everybody can agree on one stereo mix. Maybe that's possible, maybe it's not. But if you probably have better luck doing a mix mode thing here and using, again, aux 1 to create a mix for the band, aux 2 to create a mix for the voices, into your stereo transmitter, set your receivers for mix mode, and then this is the example I gave earlier, right? Use the pan knob to choose you want to hear more vocals or more instruments. You can go get some level of customization there. You've got 3 aux sends available. Now we're moving up in the world. You might create a separate mix for the drummer. That's kind of usually the way it goes. Is wedding band I used to do sound for. I would sometimes sit there and queue up the different mixes in my headphones so that I could hear what they're doing. Usually a good practice as the monitor engineer, check out, listen to what the performers are listening to. And I'd queue up the drum mix and I'd be like, obviously he doesn't care what anybody else is doing. This is all drums. I think I hear a little vocal in there, maybe a little bit, and that's about it, right? So a dedicated mix for the drummer might not be the worst idea, and you can do it with a hardwired system. So we take aux, so we leave everything set up as we had before: vocal mix, aux 1, band mix, aux 2, hook a hardwired pack up to aux 3, and there's the mix for the drummer right there. And then there's a couple of different other ways you might do it. You might do, instead of a mix of all the vocals and all in aux 1, you might do just the lead vocalist in mix 1 and everything else in mix 2. So that way the lead vocalist that wants more me has the ability to do that and tune everybody else out. So a couple of different ways to go there. In fact, option 3, instead of having a dedicated drum mix, we use aux 3 to create the ego mix. So maybe there's the leader of the band, the lead singer has to have their own custom mix. They don't just want more me, they want exactly what I want to hear for every instrument. So that's just another way you can do that. And then you get to 4 aux sends, and now you can kind of, start going even crazier. If you got a 4-piece band, you can do a separate mono mix for each person in the band. Different ways of configuring it. But the point of all this is why, to come back to the original point, which is it's so important to have a discussion with the band about what their expectations are, what the musicians are going to be looking for, what kind of experience they want. And then that will help you kind of figure out what kind of mixer you need to get enough sends to get to the number of transmitters that you need. In fact, we kind of just, provide a few little formulas here, which is how many components will I need, right? And it's broken down by if you're doing stereo, a dual mono thing, or a mono thing, right? So if stereo, you need the number of transmitters you need is equal to the number of mixes you need. and the number of aux sends that you need from your mixer is double the number of transmitters, right? Because you're doing stereo, unless they're stereo auxes, which on a lot of modern mixers they are. Again, if it's the mix mode thing, the number of transmitters that you need is equal to the number of mixes divided by 2, because you're using each transmitter to put out 2 mixes. But the number of aux sends is still 2 times the number of transmitters, right? And then mono, it's all kind of a 1-to-1 relationship, but that's probably the most little used thing is if you got a stereo transmitter, you're kind of wasting you're wasting an input by making it using a mono mixing there. We used to a few years ago have a PSM 200 that was mono only, but that is in the past. Even our most affordable system, the PSM 300, does stereo now. And of course, you always need a receiver for every performer. Without saying, there are more sophisticated ways to allow the performers to have some control over what they're hearing through a concept we call distributed mixing. My coworker, Tim Veer, many of you probably have heard of Tim, retired earlier this year, used to have a saying that distributed mixing requires distributed intelligence, because not everybody knows how to mix, right? So if you're going to give the performer the ability to mix themselves, just consider the person's abilities to kind of make sense on that, of how to build a good mix. That's what a good sound engineer gets paid for, right? Is their ability to create a mix. But again, we're talking about putting the in-ear monitoring experience in the hands of more people, more users that can't afford to have a dedicated monitor engineer. This is actually can be a real advantage here. So this concept has evolved over time. The earlier attempts at giving performers some ability to mix themselves required a much larger infrastructure investment. Back when most mixing consoles were analog, the only way to allow the performer to mix was to give them the actual signals at their location on stage, and this was accomplished via like the Aviom system, for example, where you would take the signals, individual channel signals from your front of house mixer, put them into the Aviom system that would then digitize them, and using Cat5 cable, send all of the signals out to the little stations, the pods that the performers had, where they would then mix themselves using actual knobs, and then either plug headphones directly into that thing or take the output of it into a wireless transmitter. And that was how you got that. There was also the hearback system was another one, kind of more of an analog based system, but same concept. You had a mix pod, and you had to get a way to distribute the actual audio signals to those mix pods for the performers to mix themselves. But with the advent and the popularity of now affordable digital mixers, almost any one that you can buy now allows you to hook up a Wi-Fi router, and on your iPhone or your iPad, get the app and mix yourself on the app, mixing on glass. So each performer just hooks up to the network, and voila, there's your signals, mix yourself. And then you don't have to worry about like something with the more of the mix pod type situation is like, okay, this thing's got a headphone jack on it. Where do I put my transmitter? Do I keep it right here? Do I mount it to the stand, or do I have to run a long headphone cable back to the rack where the transmitters are? Now, none of that matters, because the actual signals coming from the mixer are still at the mixer, and you just take your aux sends or your monitor sends directly into the transmitter over there. Your ability to mix yourself is now wireless. You're just mixing over Wi-Fi, essentially, that's sending the signal back to the mixer that's in the rack with the transmitters. So it really cleans everything up a whole lot. There's always, of course, the challenges of Wi-Fi environments and what's Wi-Fi doing in my venue, and the performers looking at their iPad and frowning because they can't control anything, and then something circling. But that's again kind of the world we live in. But if hopefully there's a sound person there that can make adjustments on an actual hardware surface if the performers lose control of over their Wi-Fi there. But that's typically the way it's done these days. Okay, so I talked a lot about the actual in-ear monitoring infrastructure part of it there. but we are wireless. And so we do need to keep some wireless best practices in mind here as well to get this working. Because just like a wireless microphone system, a wireless in-ear monitor system, still operating in the UHF band, still having the same sort of challenges that you can run into that you don't have when you're hardwired. So let's take a look at some of this. Some general tips. Frequency coordination still matters. If you're using wireless microphones, if you have experience with wireless mics, you understand that you need to scan for clear frequencies to make sure that you're on good frequencies, and also make sure that the frequencies using don't interfere with one another. This is why we have software like our wireless workbench software that allows you to input all of your wireless mic systems and make sure that they all play nicely together. If you're adding in-ear wireless in-ears to the mix, those matter too. Again, they're UHF based systems, just like the wireless microphones. So you actually then need to coordinate everything sort of holistically here. So again, using a tool like Wireless Workbench or others that are out there, you have to coordinate sets of frequencies that work together, including the mics and the in-ears themselves. So that's an important bit that often gets overlooked. And that's a general tip, right? Just a reminder that you need to coordinate these things together. Some higher level things, which kind of beyond the scope of what we're doing tonight is, but when you start using software like Wireless Workbench, you can actually start like isolating wireless mics from in-ears and putting them in their own parts of the frequency range. You can create something that we call inclusion groups, which is basically saying, okay, I've got so much spectrum to work with here. I want to put my wireless mics here. I want to put my in-ear monitor systems over here. And then I'm going to put my wireless comm systems over there, kind of splitting all that out, getting it all isolated is another kind of tool that you can use or lever that you can pull to make these things work well together. Another pro tip here, try not to put in-ear monitor transmitters and wireless mic receivers in the same rack together. These, depending on which system you're using, the in-ear transmitters can be sometimes have the ability to transmit at 100 milliwatts, which is very high power. And the wireless mic receivers are very sensitive, and it can kind of blow your whole coordination if you've got these antennas mere inches from each other in the same rack. For convenience sake, if you do need to do this, then you need to basically bust the antennas out of the rack, right? Get some cable, get some mic stands, get your antennas 6 feet away from the rack so that you're not blasting the in-ear transmitters aren't blasting your wireless mic receivers and desensitizing them. And the same goes for performers who might be wearing multiple packs. If you have a guitar player that is wireless and also has wireless in-ears, don't put the packs duct taped to each other, duct taped to the strap, or gaff taped, I guess I should say, but whatever. You don't want those things pressed up against each other because now you've got the transmitter blasting right directly into the receiver. Put one on the strap, one on the belt, put them both on the belt on either side, or at the very least at opposite ends of the strap. Use the human body, the great absorber of radio frequency energy that it is, to keep those two things isolated from one another, and that will generally increase the chances of success here. When it comes to antennas, you do have several options, just like with wireless microphones, that have different properties here. Most wireless in-ear monitors ship with the half-wave omnidirectional antenna, the third antenna in here from the left. Basic omnidirectional antenna works well for most applications. There's also a wideband antenna, which is the same thing. Say it's actually still a half-wave omni, but it just covers a wider frequency range, can be more easily stand-mounted. But most of the time when someone's upgrading their antenna in their in-ear monitor system, they're moving to one of the options on the left there, one of the directional choices, either the log periodic or the helical antenna. This is the Shure PA805 is a log periodic unidirectional antenna. So you can kind of see the pattern on the right there. It kind of looks like a cardioid microphone. So it's very similar. It has about 120-degree acceptance angle in the direction to which it's pointed. The advantages for that are twofold. Number one, it gives you about 7 dB of additional forward gain, which means that you have more signal pointed towards the receivers or the desired area, the stage, whatever you want to call it, right? And which increases your signal to noise ratio and minimizes the chances of dropouts. Not only because of the increased gain, but also because it reduces multipath. So multipath is interference is what's something that can happen when the radio signal emanating off a omnidirectional antenna, it goes off in all directions and reflects off of metal objects, taking multiple paths to get back to the receiver. And that's what causes dropouts, is when those reflections arrive out of phase and you can step into a null where there's no signal and you get dropout. So by minimizing the amount of reflections by using a directional antenna can minimize the chance of those multipath dropouts. And then the additional gain also gives you increased range. So if you're further away, that can be beneficial. My 2 cents on the topic is that I think these antennas get to be maybe a little bit overused, especially when the antenna is living at monitor world on the side of the stage, mere feet from the performer. You actually probably don't need this antenna, but it gets used because, you know, the mentality is often, I want to make sure I don't have dropouts. I'm going to throw everything I can at it. But sometimes you can actually make it worse by overloading the receiver by putting too much gain in it. So, you know, I don't always default to this antenna, but it is an option. Another option is the helical antenna, which is so named because you look at the antenna element itself is wound in a helical shape in the middle of that plexiglass tube there. And this antenna gives you even more directionality. It's like a 60-degree acceptance window and more gain, where it becomes even more applicable to wireless in-ear monitors, particularly if you're using a non-diversity receiver, which is pretty much all of them except for PSM 1000. It actually minimizes the chance of getting multipath dropouts by having a non-polarized signal. And this is, again, getting probably way out of scope for this, but maybe someday we can do an antenna focused webinar where we talk about polarization of the radio wave and all of that sort of thing. But essentially by taking polarization out of the equation, it further reduces the chances of dropouts, particularly with single antenna systems. And you probably see this antenna used more commonly with in-ear monitor systems than you do with wireless mic systems, even though it could be used for both. It's a passive antenna, works both ways. In fact, that's actually important. I'm going to go back here for a second. This is also a passive antenna. We do have an active version, the UA874, that has a little amplifier built onto it that is only used for wireless microphones, not for wireless in-ears, because it can't be used as a transmit antenna if it's amplified. The amplifier only lets signal go in one way, so those are specifically designed only for wireless microphones. Not to mention, if we put an amplifier on the antenna and cranked that signal up on the output of the transmitter, it would no longer fall within the approved specification of the FCC type approval that was given to the product. So that's another reason we can't do that. So it's always passive antennas on the receive side here with our in-ear monitor systems. The last sort of RF related topic here is antenna combining. Just like with wireless microphones, the fewer antennas you have on stage, the better. That's really critical when we're talking about PSM, because now, you know, the number one thing that aggravates interference with transmitters is the intermodulation that can happen when multiple transmitters get close to one another, and I should say their antennas get close to one another. With wireless microphones, this can be an issue. It's not maybe as big of an issue because the transmitters are scattered around a performance area, but when the transmitters are all crammed together in the same rack, that complicates things because now the antennas are on the back of the transmitters and intermodulation can be really problematic. So you remove that issue by having all of your transmitters sharing a single common antenna. It doesn't have to be the log periodic. That's just what we use for illustration purposes here. But not only does it clean everything up, it actually makes things work a lot better. So when you're talking about putting in multiple transmitters in a rack, the antenna combiner shouldn't be thought of as an optional accessory, but as pretty much a required accessory, I would say. So definitely some advantage with that. Oh, sorry, I forgot about antenna positioning. There's one more antenna related topic here, which is positioning the antennas. And what I mean by positioning is the in-ear monitor transmit antenna in relation to the wireless mic receive antennas. Since this is a two-dimensional drawing, it may not be totally obvious, but the wall to the left there behind the log periodics, think of that as monitor world, and the stage is on the right. And you will notice that the in-ear monitor transmit antenna is about 6 feet forward of the wireless mic receive antennas. And that is because you don't want your in-ear transmitter blaring right into your wireless mic receive antennas. So you put it out in front, closer to the stage with the wireless mic receivers behind it. And because that, if you're using a helical, is so directional, it's not going to affect the wireless mic receive antennas that are behind it. Again, a lot of times on a lot of stages, you see these things kind of right next to each other, sort of all in the same plane. And that's not what you want. You want the receive antennas 6 feet behind your transmit antenna. All right, to wrap up here, I think we're kind of going to leave some time for Q&A here. I just want to talk for a moment about safe listening with personal monitors, because a common thing that you heard, probably some marketing speak, was like, use in-ear monitors and it'll save your hearing. Well, a better way to say that would be, used properly, they can be better for your hearing, right? And the reason that's true, the reason they don't just automatically make it better for your hearing is you can still crank that thing up to some pretty significant sound levels, right? So you still on your own have to monitor what you're doing, no pun intended, to make sure that you don't, blow your own ears out, right? And one of the things that could cause you to do that is using non-isolating earphones, or we can skip that now, using non-isolating earphones, or just using only one earphone. In fact, that's the worst. And unfortunately, you see it so much, even professional performers on stage, where they get up there and they pop one ear out. So they want to hear the crowd, but now you can't hear what's going on in the left ear that's actually still plugged up anymore. So what do? You turn your pack up higher because you can. You basically need to be 6 dB above the ambient noise level to perceive that anything is happening in the one earphone that you actually have in. So that means if your band's hitting 110 dB SPL on stage, you're going to have to putting 116 dB SPL in the plugged up ear to even know it's there. That's why we had this chart in there that showed the difference between rock music at 10 feet and the threshold of pain, right? That 6 dB puts you darn near the threshold of pain because you refuse to wear both earphones. Some of the strategies you can use to help get around that, if you're trying to help a band out that, they just insist on only using one earphone, use to put some ambient mics on stage that we feed only into the in-ear monitor mix, right? If you do that, then you can get that crowd feedback and hear that noise, but still be listening at a safe level, right? So ambient mics are a good technique for that. There's also ambient earphones out there. I'm not sure who else does it besides Sensophonics, but at least Sensophonics has that. But that's another pack you need to wear, because now you've got your in-ear monitor, wireless in-ear monitor receiver. You come out of that into the pack that controls the ambient earphones, which are earphones with little microphones on it. And then you blend those two signals in together. So that's another option that, again, allows you to listen at a safer level than just popping one earphone out. Always use a system that has a limiter on it, because any unexpected spikes that might cause hearing damage can be kind of clamped down by that limiter. And pay attention to what your ears are telling you. I always tell people, if you take your earphones out at the end of a show and you have that muffled feeling or your ears are ringing, well, guess what? You're probably listening too loud and should turn it down. The best thing you can do, though, is really have your hearing checked regularly. And if you're a performing musician, why are you not doing this anyway? Your ears are what you rely on to make your living. You should probably at least once a year be visiting an audiologist and getting a baseline, see where your hearing is at, making sure it's there. If you get it checked and you're starting to see some dips, again, maybe you're probably listening too loud. So definitely important. None of this has anything to do with a keytar, but when I was going through our photo library to put this presentation together and saw a photo of a guy with a keytar, that is going in the PowerPoint. How can you pass that up? So there you go. I play in a band with a keytarist. I think it's the best thing ever. Okay, that's enough of my talking. It's almost an hour here. So I'm going to wrap that up. Hopefully there was something useful in there. But if there's any questions, I'm going to turn it back to Jay, and happy to answer anything that might be out there.
Yeah, we got a couple of things here, Gino. Also, Marcy, if you're still on and still listening, if you'll type your question into the Q&A window, we'll see if we can get to that. A couple of things you mentioned about during the frequency coordination part of separating ears away from mics and guitars and so forth. So for a band, for an example, that's getting ready to invest or as a sound company who's investing in in-ear monitoring rigs, how do they know how to what bands to purchase, what frequency bands to purchase? How do they know? What resources are available to help steer them in the right direction, regardless of vendor for that?
That's a great question. Well, I think number one, you do kind of have to reach out to the vendor, I think, for assistance with that information. And I mean, I have to use Shure as an example because that's what I know, right?
Of
On our
course.
website, we have a wireless frequency finder tool, right? And I assume other wireless manufacturers have similar. But you would go there and you would enter, if it's a fixed location, the zip code where you're using it, or the city name. If it's a touring location, maybe, some of the major markets you're going to be at, because they tend to have the most crowded RF environments. And that tool will tell you what's available, for the different systems we have. What are the best frequency bands to use? How many channels can you use in each frequency band? And that will kind of get you on the road there, right? At least towards purchasing the right thing. I would also say that if possible, if the RF landscape looks good in these areas, or it's available to you, purchase different frequency bands for your wireless mics and in-ears so that they don't overlap, right? So, if you're going to go with, Shure ULXD wireless, and you got that in the J50 band, and that's another thing too, you have to inventory what you already have. If you're buying in-ears and you already have wireless mics, really important question is you need to know what you have already. So say you've got G50 ULXDs, maybe you go for in-ear monitors in one of the J bands, which is a different frequency range that's higher in the UHF band. That will make your coordination easier than if everything is all in that what Shure calls the G band, which is kind of the lower part of the UHF TV spectrum. Those things they all have to kind of intermix and live in that same spectrum there. It's going to make it harder. So you need to know where you are or where you're going to be, and use our wireless frequency finder tool to get suggestions there, and know if there's already wireless in existence, what are those frequency bands, and then you can kind of figure out how to get an in-ear system that is separate or different from that.
Excellent. So when a band rolls in and does a setup and at a venue for the first time ever, what's best practice in terms of, like, if they're just going to scan? Okay, so we're going to scan to find our frequencies because that's what we do, right?
Yeah.
So if a band rolls into a venue for the first time, do they scan their ears and get those set up first? Or do they scan microphones first and instrument wireless second, and ears third? What's the best recommended practice for that?
Well, the best recommended practice, if it's available to you, and we're kind of going on the assumption that every system you're using has the ability to scan, right?
Mm-hmm.
The best thing to do is to try and scan all of the bands that you're using as a starting point. In other words, it's you won't get the best result if you just do this one and then do this one and then do this one. You kind of want to have, at this point, you're hopefully using software like Wireless Workbench to get a good set of frequencies. But what you're going to want to do is use whatever device you have available that's connected to your computer, one of our receivers maybe, or something wideband, right, to do that initial RF scan, and then use that scan data to coordinate a set of frequencies for all of the wireless that you're using. Because that way you know that everything will work together. If you take a different approach, if you just say, like, well, we're just going to scan our in-ears first and get those set, and then we'll scan our wireless mics after that, even if you leave all the in-ear transmitters on, the secondary scan that you do for your wireless mics can't account for any intermodulation that might affect the in-ear monitors, right? So the wireless mics might come up with frequencies that they like, but it creates intermodulation products that land on top of the in-ears. Well, then you can rescan your in-ears, but then it's like, then it becomes just a losing sum game, because you're just constantly trying to find something that'll work. If that's all you have, is that's the only tool you have, that's a way to do it, but it's going to take a little more trial and error than just doing one complete scan in Wireless Workbench and coordinating all at once one set of frequencies for everything.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. So I got another question here. These systems also find their way into other applications. Mm-hmm. Can you speak to some other applications or best practices for use in IFB, or interrupted fallback, yes, for news reporters and for sideline game reporters and things of that nature.
Mhm.
Do they,
Yeah.
and they use different earpieces as well.
Yeah. So that is something that has actually become very common, right? So IFB, as you said, interruptible foldback, it's often what the talent in a news field application is, or in a studio, I guess could be in a studio too, right? That's what they use to hear, director cues or producer cues, or, get that information directly into their ear. Often you see the earphones typically have a little coily cord thing coming off of it, right? That's the IFB system there. And there's really no reason a PSM system like this couldn't be used for the same thing. And the reason they've kind of have been adopted for that is they typically have better sound quality and much better RF performance than some of the more traditional IFB systems that are out there. Again, we have a whole FAQ on our website about this. There are some things to watch out for. Some of the communication systems that feed the signal into the IFBs have what's called a wet line, which has a voltage on it, and you have to be careful connecting that voltage into our transmitter. You might need to defeat that, so you're not sending the signal in there that might damage the transmitter or something. There's a couple. I think those are becoming less and less common, though. If it's a dry line, you don't have to worry about it, but something to watch out for. But yeah, absolutely use there. In fact, even our earphones, we actually have like a single adapter that if you want to use one of our in-ear earphones for that IFB application, that can be done as well. So definitely common. And also, even in the back to the kind of performance environment too, a lot of times these in-ear monitor systems are used to create mixes for the techs on stage as well. Instead of using traditional comm system, they're just they've got their own mix for the technicians to use. It's another way.
I've personally seen in some occasions, particularly for like convention center style work, where they'll use an intermonitor transmitter and portable receivers to feed powered loudspeakers for remote locations too.
Yes, how could I forget point-to-point wireless?
Point-to-point, yeah.
I've done that myself, right? And that's a great way to use an in-ear monitor system. If you've got a bunch of speaker locations that you don't want to run cable to, take an output from your mixer into a transmitter, throw a pack on top of your powered loudspeaker, and again, as many as you want, right? And you just get it out there and get it done, and it actually works extremely well. It sounds very good, and you can get quite the range on these systems. If you put one of these in like 100 milliwatt mode and throw some directional antennas on either end, 1,000 feet of range sometimes. So
as a matter of fact, a rental and staging company here in Indianapolis utilizes point-to-point to cover the Indianapolis 500 Festival parade, as well as the 500 mini marathon. And I got to tell you, these are big events. And yeah, so that's how they feed their delay systems up and down the streets. But yeah, so
cool.
PSM's got a lot of applications. I got one last question here, and that I swear this is not a ringer question. With the proliferation of digital consoles and digital wireless microphone systems, why does it seem like the majority of IEM systems remain analog? I swear, it's not me.
No,
it's a valid question. It's a valid question.
It's a fair question. It's a valid question. We get the question often. So, the main reason that it's going to get there eventually, right? Someday in the probably not too distant future, you're just not, I could be able to get, right now you can't get the components to build anything. That's another story, but you're not going to be able to get the components to build analog wireless anymore, right? I think in-ear monitor systems and some of the lower end wireless mic systems like our VLX are still analog, but that's about the only things that I think are still analog wireless anymore, right? So eventually they are going to go digital, right? I think one of the reasons we haven't prioritized it and others haven't too is because of the latency issue, right? Anytime you are running a digital anything in the audio world, right? The analog to digital and digital analog conversion is going to add a little bit of latency. And when you're using an isolating earphone, right? When you put your fingers in your ears or put earplugs in and talk, how you get that resonance in your head, right? So you're hearing yourself more in your head because your ears are plugged up. Then throw 5 to 7 milliseconds of delay on that for what's coming back into your ears. And now you're getting comb filtering in your head and it can sound weird, right? Not to say that that's bothers everyone. It's interesting how some people, everybody kind of has a different tolerance for latency. Some people can't take any, it drives them nuts. Some people, as long as it's not a slap back, they're like, what? I don't hear anything. But that is, I think, the major hurdle that needs to be overcome to make an effective digital in-ear monitor system. Can it be done? Yes. Is it being looked at? Of course, it'll go there someday, but I think that's why we just, it's a much bigger problem with in-ears than it is with like wireless microphones, for example, which have gotten pretty good. I mean, our Axient Digital is down to like 1.9 milliseconds, right? That's hardly anything to get too concerned about. But remember that latency can be cumulative, right? So if you've got delay in your wireless mic, delay in your console, and then delay in your monitor system, if you start getting up to 15, 20 milliseconds of delay, that's problematic. Anything less than 5, most people can't perceive, right? So, but because it's cumulative, that's where it needs to be as short as possible everywhere. So yes, it's on everyone's mind, and like I said, we'll have no choice but to go there, in the near future anyway.
All right. Well, I think that's all of the questions that we have. Well, Gino, on behalf of the Central Indiana AES organization or section, excuse me, thank you for sharing your time, your expertise with us. And please know that we genuinely appreciate it. And thanks to everyone out there for joining us this evening. And thanks to Nate Sparks, who's our Ninja Zoom guy, and to Sir Barry Zimmerman for his organizational skills, and Brett Leonard for his help in bringing this event to fruition. If this is your first event with us, I invite you to find your way to the Central Indiana AES.org website and join our mailing list. You can also check out some of our previous and upcoming activities, and well, heck, check the membership button. Come join up, have some fun. Our next event will be an in-person one coming up on May the 5th. Stay tuned for details on that one. And there's a lot more to come this summer. We're going to have a busy, really good AES Central Indiana section year this year for activities. So I think that's it for now. Again, appreciate everybody joining us. And Gino, thank you. And everybody have a good evening.